Hello there. I'd like to talk to you about a contrasting style in governance. And that style is traditional governance vis-a-vis modern governance, and what that means when you're intervening in different parts of the world. So, governance issues, traditional meets modern. Set the scene a little bit. In this slide, these young ladies, girls, have been brought by their mothers to practice a welcoming ceremonial dance for a Timorese VIP, Mr. Ramos Horta, who was the joint Nobel Prize winner along with Bishop Bello for the peace process in East Timor. And the mums were running them through their drills early one morning down on the dirt strip before Mr. Ramos Horta landed about 10:30, 11 that morning. And these traditional customs of greeting and showing respect were extremely important to the Timorese. And because I spoke not a word of their language, nor really understood very much of what they were doing, I was going along as a spectator to look and to watch. But you couldn't help but be absolutely impressed with the dignity and sincerity with which they did these sort of things. They'd gone through 16 years of independence struggle. Everybody, every family had lost a brother, son, uncle, whatever in the fighting. Many of them had had some of their women folk horribly violated and tortured and used as pawns and political leverage. And so these were people who had really suffered. And yet they still had the most wonderful dignity and respect for their traditional forms and functions. So, later during my time, we were visited by the real hero of the independence movement, Jeanana Gusmão. Gusmão is on the right. On the extreme right is the guy who eventually became prime minister. Gusmão eventually became president. He's talking to village tribal leaders up in the mountains. And the important thing to realize, and just to put it in perspective for you, Gusmão's position in East Timor is directly analogous to the position of Mandela in South Africa. He was a fighter, he was a leader, he was imprisoned, he was treated dreadfully, and he finally came out on the winning side. But it's a thing that you may or may not know about the Nobel Peace Prize. It's never given to people who have picked up guns and really fought and really killed and really done their thing. It's given for those who supported a peaceful approach to conflict resolution. And in fact, I think, as conflicting as that may sound, I think they've probably got it right with that. I think they've probably got it right. If you think of the number of people who might have been put up for a peace prize after having started and then won some horrible little war. So, yes, Gusmão, a tremendous guy. So, Gusmão does not speak the language of the guys he's talking to. In my small little province, about 120,000 people, there were 13 languages. Just across the horizon, over the horizon, was the island of Papua New Guinea, where there are 800 local languages. And you have to understand that a local language can be in one little part of a watershed, one tributary of a village, of a river, can have its own language, because the people don't mix that much with people outside of their valley. Anyway, as in Timor, successive migrations had arrived, certain of those people have been pushed up further and further into the hills, and that's why we had this banded situation where there were 13 different languages. But again, the greeting given to Gusmão was sincere, They all knew who he was. They all knew that their villages had all sacrificed people for the freedom fight as well. And I rode with Gujmao up in his car to this, on this particular visit. Although behind him, like a comet, he had a trail of expat Timorese, all educated in Australia, all wanting to come back with all sorts of useful ideas. And it was them, really. It was the Comet Trail that gave me the idea for this. I asked Gujmao what he wanted me to do. I said, you are essentially the president in waiting. I am here as a temporary caretaker. What do you want me to do for your people? He is very, very wise and very impressive. He said, particularly in this province, these people, all of them, have hurt so much. Just don't do anything to hurt them, and don't let the land go back to Indonesia. In other words, they had fought for independence. You must keep the independence. But once we've got our independence and there's no threat to that, if they want to go and trade across the border for kerosene, if they want to do this, that and the other, don't start getting all snarky with them. They've suffered enough. He was a very, very humane man. And we did have autonomists who had wanted autonomy within Timor. The independence vote was 75%, only 25% said autonomy, but the 25% had been armed by the Indonesian military and special police and had gone on the rampage. The real rampaging after the referendum was done by Timorese on Timorese. It was a classic civil war, very similar to 1921 in Ireland, where Irish Catholics in the Orange Free State, who didn't want to accept the compromise situation with the British, wanted to fight on, and the 60-70% said, no, we're going to take the charter, we are okay, we will come back in 10 years when we've rebuilt, and we'll get further independence. So it's very common to have these schisms within an independence movement. The traditional form of governance of village elders, of roll ascription, of village meetings to decide on things was very, very strong in my province. And I was expected to produce a slightly different style. This is me, and at the table there is my 19-year-old interpreter, Inacia. That's a story in its own right. And I am holding a mandated town hall meeting. And it was very curious. There were things that I did as governor where, for instance, we had a collective consulting the ancestors. Again, I've made a vignette about consulting the ancestors. This was not in the style of consulting the ancestors. This was in the style of, this is a town hall meeting. This is where we want to take certain issues in Timor whilst we are conducting the international trusteeship. It's only going to be 3 years, but we're going to try and achieve the following objectives, blah, blah. And we laid that very much in the way that we would have done in any town hall meeting, in any Atlantic-based culture. The locals were fascinated. They listened, they went home, and took no further notice of it. It wasn't presented to them in a way that they recognized, and so therefore it was interesting. The provincial governor called people together and spoke to them. Of course they wanted to turn up and listen, but it wasn't the way that they normally settled things at their village meetings. The diaspora, the return of the diaspora Timorese, young, qualified, educationally qualified from Australia, they were quite problematic. One couldn't help but admire their resolve and desire, but they used Australian language. They didn't use village language. They liked the idea of the town hall meetings, and they kept pressing our administration to keep doing them. So we kept doing them. But as the old missionary who acted as my cultural interpreter up in the hills said, if you, the governor, tell them to do something, because you're the governor, they'll do it once. If you tell them to do something that goes along with their adat, their common law, their customary procedure, you'll tell them once and they'll keep doing it every time that situation occurs. Harness the adat, easy work. Ignore the adat, very, very painful. Every time the same thing you have to tell. The diaspora didn't like this. They didn't. And when I said to them, look, I've asked about this and I'm going to try and follow the adat. And they said, but the adat has nothing to do with gender equality. It says nothing about abuse within the family. And they caught up on all these issues in Australia. And I said, yes, I understand that. But if we want them to keep doing it, first thing, we have to have food. This is a subsistence economy. I can't, just parachute new ideas into that. They've got to have their fields going, and they've got to have the men working the paddy fields and the women doing the vegetables. It's what they're used to. Oh, no, you don't have to do this. You're stuck, There's none of this, what did they call it? Romanticism of a very, very difficult lifestyle. And I would say it's not actually romanticism, it's reality. We never really resolved that. The thing that resolved it was the lack of resources. Until resources came on stream, all of those discussions about all those other issues were purely academic. But now I want to go back to a totally different comparison. When I was in Canada in the mid-late 80s, was chair of a electoral district land use planning advisory committee. The bigger Halifax County area decided that they would consult every single electoral district, I think there were 8 of them within the county, would get to have literally a paper map and would mark where they thought development should go, where housing should be put, where new roads should run. In other words, they should have input into the local planning of the local situation. And this came back to me very, very strongly when I was attending village meetings in Timor. 60 to 80% of my Timorese were illiterate. But that didn't mean they were stupid. 99% of the Canadians who turned up to the land use planning meetings were either literate or super literate or literate on steroids. The quality of the discourse and the quality of discussion in Canada was tragic compared to the subtlety of how they talked about various issues and problems at the village meetings in Timor. Now, Canada was used to a rate of change of social progress and economic progress way more than the Timorese. The Timorese had a very slow moving, at that time, economy and social system. But the wisdom they showed in their consideration for future generations in Timor was completely missing in Canada. In Canada, it was represented by, not in my backyard. No, we don't want anything that smells there, but we want stuff over in other people's backyard that smells like mad because we need the jobs. And the crude and frequently irreconcilable views that I experienced from literate people in Canada contrasted so much with how these Timorese guys wanted their society to run. They wanted their traditional methods. They wanted their traditional protocols. They were comfortable with it. And you know what? It worked for them. As a subsistence society, it worked for them. So I put this on the table as a way of saying to all the developmentalists out there who want another green revolution, by the way, bad news, they're still paying in most of the developing world for the last green revolution 30 years ago. If you want to introduce a networked internet society into a society where 60 to 80% people are illiterate, then you will have tears brought on by good intentions, but in that case, the road to hell is paved with good intentions. Again, the big message really in all of this is you've got to go with the locals. And I like to think that in the Cynefin analysis, we really do get that. I just want to really draw your attention to the chaotic, because I've covered all the other stuff already. Beware well-intentioned social development projects, because they have ruined many traditional societies. I'm not saying that I have a magic wand to wave over it, but I would say, when in doubt, go with the local values and accept a slower rate of change in exchange for legitimacy and acceptance by the community. But it's not my particular area of expertise, but it is an area in which I have some painful experience. And that's really all I want to say about that.